The arena in Turkey was glowing under the bright championship lights, the kind of atmosphere that only boxing can create. Thousands of fans filled the stands, the low rumble of anticipation echoing through the building as the main event drew closer. Cameras flashed, commentators whispered predictions, and the ring stood quietly in the center, like a battlefield waiting for its warriors. This wasn't just another fight night, it was a clash of experience and rising dominance. On one side stood James Dickens from the United Kingdom, a veteran who had spent years battling through the toughest nights boxing could offer. At 34 years old, Dickens had already experienced the brutal highs and lows of the sport. Victories, defeats, setbacks, and comebacks had shaped him into a hardened professional. Across the ring would stand the Olympic gold medalist from Russia, Albert Batyrgaziev, younger, undefeated, and carrying the reputation of a fighter destined for greatness. The Russian southpaw was not just another champion. He was the product of an elite amateur pedigree, crowned Olympic champion in Tokyo, and backed by powerful promoters and expectations that stretched far beyond a single night. The stakes could not have been higher. On the line were the WBA interim super featherweight title and the IBA Pro World Championship, two belts that symbolized global recognition in a fiercely competitive division. But beyond the belts, there was something deeper at play: pride, legacy, and validation. For Batyrgaziev, this was another step in proving he belonged among the elite of the professional world. For Dickens, this was something else entirely. It was an opportunity to prove that experience, heart, and resilience could still overcome youth and hype. As the arena lights dimmed and the ring announcer stepped forward, the noise from the crowd swelled into a roar. The moment everyone had been waiting for had finally arrived. First came the challenger. James Dickens walked slowly toward the ring, his expression calm but focused, the kind of look that only fighters with years of experience possess. His record spoke volumes: 34 wins, 5 losses, and 14 knockouts. But numbers alone could never capture the story behind them. Dickens had fought his way through the hard roads of professional boxing, traveling across countries, stepping into hostile arenas, and facing some of the toughest opponents the division had to offer. He wasn't a flashy superstar, but those who truly understood boxing knew exactly how dangerous he could be. His southpaw stance, clever movement, and relentless inside fighting had earned him respect across the sport. Tonight, he stood representing the legendary Golden Drink Club Dubai, but more importantly, he stood representing every fighter who had clawed their way through adversity. Across the arena, the champion prepared for his entrance. Albert Batyrgaziev was introduced with the confidence of a rising star. Only 27 years old, standing slightly taller than his opponent, and carrying an undefeated professional record of 12 victories with 8 knockouts. His Olympic gold medal from Tokyo hung over his reputation like a shining crown. Batyrgaziev was widely viewed as the future of the division, a fighter with technical brilliance, long reach, sharp combinations, and a relentless forward pressure that had overwhelmed most of his opponents. Yet there had been small glimpses of vulnerability in his young professional career. He had been dropped before, caught by punches he didn't always see coming when his aggressive instincts took over. Tonight, he faced a man experienced enough to exploit those moments. As the national anthems of England and Russia played through the arena, both fighters stood silently in their corners, absorbing the gravity of the moment. The crowd fell into respectful silence, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. The introductions concluded, the belts were displayed, and the referee called both fighters to the center of the ring. They touched gloves briefly, exchanging a look that carried both respect and quiet determination. 12 rounds were scheduled, and as the opening bell rang, the atmosphere instantly shifted from ceremonial to explosive. Right from the opening seconds, James Dickens stepped forward with purpose. Instead of allowing the younger champion to dictate the pace, the veteran took control of the center of the ring. His jab snapped out repeatedly, sharp and precise, probing the defenses of Batyrgaziev. The Russian champion moved cautiously at first, stalking forward with his hands high, studying his opponent, and waiting for an opening to unleash his own offense. But Dickens was the busier man early. His footwork was crisp, his head movement subtle but effective, and every jab seemed to land just enough to disrupt Batyrgaziev's rhythm. The Englishman doubled and even tripled his jab at times, forcing the champion to react instead of initiate. It was a disciplined, intelligent start, exactly the kind of strategy needed against a fighter with Olympic pedigree. Batyrgaziev tried to close the distance, stepping forward and searching for opportunities to unleash his powerful straight left hand. But Dickens continued to circle, controlling the tempo and keeping the champion guessing. By the end of the opening round, it was clear that the challenger had come with a well-crafted plan. He wasn't intimidated by the undefeated record or the Olympic gold medal. Instead, he fought with confidence, showing the poise of a man who had been in deep waters many times before. As the bell sounded to end the first round, many observers ringside nodded quietly. The veteran from England had drawn first blood in the tactical battle. The second round began with Batyrgaziev attempting to adjust his strategy. The Russian champion started to push forward more aggressively, looking to impose his physical presence and force Dickens into uncomfortable exchanges. Yet Dickens seemed completely unfazed by the pressure. He remained composed, slipping punches with subtle movements, and firing counters whenever the champion overextended. The physical strength of Dickens quickly became apparent. Although Batyrgaziev possessed the longer reach, the Englishman looked sturdier inside the ring, muscling his opponent backward in close exchanges and refusing to give ground easily. Dickens mixed his attacks cleverly, alternating between sharp jabs upstairs and digging left hands into the body. Each time Batyrgaziev attempted to close the distance, Dickens greeted him with another stiff jab or a well-timed hook. The crowd began to sense something interesting unfolding. The heavily favored Olympic champion was not dominating the fight as many had expected. Instead, he found himself forced into a gritty contest against a seasoned veteran who seemed determined to turn the fight into a war of attrition. Batyrgaziev threw combinations and attempted to increase his punch output, but many of his shots lacked the clean accuracy needed to truly trouble Dickens. Meanwhile, the Englishman continued to land the more eye-catching punches. His jab remained the key weapon, repeatedly snapping the champion's head back and disrupting his rhythm. As the second round closed, commentators ringside began discussing the momentum. 2 rounds in, the challenger appeared to be ahead on the scorecards. For Batyrgaziev, the message was clear: adjustments needed to come quickly. By the third round, the fight had evolved into a rugged, physical contest, fought at close quarters. Dickens seemed determined to drag Batyrgaziev into the exact kind of fight he preferred, one fought shoulder to shoulder, where experience and toughness could outweigh youthful speed. The Englishman dipped low, weaving under punches and working relentlessly inside. Short hooks, body shots, and quick uppercuts began to pile up as he forced the champion to fight at a pace he wasn't fully comfortable with. Batyrgaziev attempted to respond with sharp counters, occasionally landing clean left hands and body shots of his own. But Dickens remained relentless, constantly pressing forward and refusing to allow the Russian champion any breathing room. Every exchange seemed to favor the veteran's compact style, The crowd could sense the growing intensity, reacting loudly to each successful combination. Blood began to appear as the fight wore on, a sign that both fighters were absorbing serious punishment. Yet Dickens seemed energized by the physical battle. His confidence grew with each passing exchange. The Olympic champion was still dangerous, still throwing punches with bad intentions, but something about the rhythm of the fight favored the challenger. By the end of the round, Batyrgaziev was working extremely hard just to keep pace. The momentum was clearly shifting toward Dickens, whose experience in tough fights was beginning to show. As both fighters returned to their corners, the atmosphere in the arena was electric. A potential upset was quietly beginning to take shape. Round 4 began with Batyrgaziev attempting to create more distance, bouncing lightly on his feet, and trying to re-establish his jab. It was a smart adjustment, and for a moment it seemed to slow Dickens' relentless pressure. But the veteran remained patient. He continued stalking forward, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Then suddenly, the fight exploded. A powerful right hook from Dickens landed cleanly, snapping Batyrgaziev's head sideways and instantly sending shockwaves through the arena. The champion staggered, his legs betraying him as he tried desperately to remain upright. The damage was obvious. Moments later, another heavy punch crashed through his guard, sending him crashing down to the canvas. The crowd erupted in disbelief as the undefeated Olympic champion struggled to rise. Batyrgaziev beat the count and bravely returned to his feet, but his legs were still unsteady. Dickens sensed the opportunity immediately. Like a seasoned predator, he surged forward, unleashing a storm of punches aimed at finishing the fight. Hooks, straight shots, and body blows rained down as the champion retreated toward the ropes. Batyrgaziev tried to defend himself, covering up and attempting to survive the onslaught, but the momentum had completely shifted. Another devastating shot sent him down again. This time, the situation looked even more dangerous. With Batyrgaziev clearly hurt and struggling to regain control of his legs, the ringside tension reached its peak. Dickens pressed forward with controlled aggression, not reckless but calculated, knowing victory was within reach. The veteran unleashed another flurry of punches, each one carrying the weight of years spent chasing moments like this. The champion's corner watched anxiously, realizing their fighter was in serious trouble. Batyrgaziev tried to fight back with courage, attempting to hold on and weather the storm, but his body simply could not recover in time. The referee observed closely as Dickens continued landing clean shots. Finally, recognizing the danger, Batyrgaziev's corner made the difficult but responsible decision. A white towel flew into the ring, the universal signal that the fight was over. The referee immediately stepped in, waving his arms to halt the contest. The arena exploded with noise as the reality of the moment set in. James Dickens had just stopped the undefeated Olympic champion in spectacular fashion. As the official announcement echoed through the arena, the magnitude of the victory became clear. At 2 minutes and 26 seconds of the 4th round, the fight had been stopped. The winner by knockout in the new WBA interim and IBA pro super featherweight champion of the world, James Dickens. The veteran from England stood in the center of the ring, overwhelmed with emotion, as the belts were placed around his waist. It was a moment that represented years of dedication, sacrifice, and perseverance. Not long ago, many had questioned whether Dickens' career had reached its peak. Yet here he was, proving that determination and experience could still overcome youth and hype. Across the ring, Batyrgaziev showed the heart of a true champion, rising from defeat with dignity after a courageous effort. For Dickens, however, this night would forever stand as one of the greatest achievements of his career. Against the odds, in hostile territory, he had executed the perfect game plan and delivered a performance that stunned the boxing world. The veteran had walked into the lion's den and walked out a champion.